Chris Kreider could be nearing a return for the New York Rangers, which is good news. However, we are discussing why Peter Laviolette needs to keep Kreider and Mika on separate lines.
You're Locked on the New York Rangers, your daily podcast on the New York Rangers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, Blue Shirts fans, to episode number 1225 of the Locked On New York Rangers podcast. I'm your host, John Chick. Just want to thank you guys, as always, for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. And today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code Locked On NHL for $20 off of your first purchase. And we are, of course, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So, like I mentioned just a second ago, it sounds like Chris Kreider could be nearing a return for the New York Rangers, may be about to get back into the lineup. All signs are pointing that that will happen sooner rather than later. Haven't seen anything specific as far as whether or not he's going to play against the Avalanche. The same can also be said for Filip Chytil. Going to have more on that in a little bit here for sure. But my plea to the Rangers and the coaching staff is that whenever Chris Kreider does make it back to the lineup, let's go ahead and keep Chris Kreider and Mika Zibanejad on separate lines. Mika the other night continued his point scoring streak. He got it up to 6 games with an assist. His one-timer was not going to hit the net, but it hit Vincent Trocheck, fell to his skates, and Trocheck was able to back in at home. So a unique assist to be sure for Mika Zibanejad. And of course, during that 6-game point streak, Kreider was out there for some of that as well with Mika Zibanejad. Nevertheless, I had a thought while watching the Rangers win against the Knights, which again was a great win. The Rangers really battled, really worked for it, really earned that victory, earned those 2 points against a very tough team in their barn. But the thought that I had, or one of the thoughts that I had watching that game, was that when Kreider does return, Mika Zibanejad and Kreider need to be on separate lines. And I'm not going to go off right now and, bury one player or the other and say, oh, it's Mika's fault. Oh, it's Kreider's fault, this, that, and the other thing. Look, there's times this year where the play of those two together and individually has certainly left a lot to be desired. And, I've said my piece on that in prior episodes, but Mika's starting to play better. And as far as Kreider goes, I'm hoping that maybe this time away is a little bit of a blessing in disguise. Nobody ever wants to get hurt and miss time and miss games and whatnot, but you got to figure, he'd been struggling a little bit. How much of that is due to the back injury? We're not 100% sure. But obviously, I think the hope for most Ranger fans, including myself, is that this time away has done him some good. He's healed up a little bit, and he's ready to start with a clean slate. And what I want to do now, and we'll get into the specific reasons why I want Mika and Kreider on different lines. But for right now, let's just go ahead and update everybody on the line combinations that we saw at practice on Monday. The top line was unchanged. You got Panarin, Trocheck, and Lafreniere left to right. Lafreniere's been scuffling a little bit. The other two have picked it up recently. I would still keep this line together, so I like that. You've got a second line left to right of Cooley, Mika, and Smith. I think the three of them have looked, pretty good together overall. I think Mika's benefiting from, playing with a grinded out type of player like Will Cooley, and Smith has played better. The last 3 or 4 games, I would think Smith has looked better, looked more dangerous, just a lot more noticeable on the ice. And so they're going to keep those 3 together, or at least that's what it looks like. And then here's where things start to get a little bit interesting. Chris Kreider back into the lineup on the third line. Left to right, the third line at practice is Kreider, Chytil, and Kaliyev. So you'll notice that Filip Chytil also back, at least in practice, into the lineup. A lot to unpack here. Let me actually start with Kaliyev, because I understand the Rangers wanting to give Kaliyev a fair chance, a decent look. I don't think he's done anything overly impressive in his first 2 games as a Ranger, but he probably deserves a little bit more of a chance than just that to show the Rangers what he can do. Wasn't the biggest fan of Berard being sent down, but we talked about that in the last episode, and I've already said my piece there. As far as Kaliyev goes, though, he's about to get his chance here, because Kreider and Chytil, I know they're both back from injury. I know Kreider was scuffling a little bit this season. I get all that. But nevertheless, Kaliyev, in his 3rd game as a Ranger, if these line combinations hold up for the next game, he's going to be out there with 2 of the more, established players on this team. The longest tenured Ranger, and I believe Filip Chytil, if you can believe this, is now the 3rd longest tenured player on the New York Rangers. So he's going to be out there with a couple of veterans, guys that are certainly capable of scoring some goals. We'll see how he does, but I feel like The Rangers are being fair to Kaliyev. They're giving him a chance, but the clock is ticking. They're on the outside of the playoffs looking in right now. They can only afford to do the Kaliyev experiment for too long, and then I think you'll see them make some adjustments and maybe go back to Brodzinski, maybe go back to VZ, maybe get Brett Berard called back up, maybe even Brian Othman. We're going to be talking about the Wolf Pack a little bit later in today's episode, so they got some options there. I'm good with them putting Kaliyev there, though. As far as Kreider on the third line, I think it's fine to start him there, while he's making his return. And man, does this bottom six look better. I mean, it's nothing against Brodzinski and VZ, who are now the odd men out with these new line combinations here. But all of a sudden, you go from them to Kreider and Hedl, and all of a sudden you feel a little bit better about the bottom six potentially scoring offensively, which is what this fourth line did in the last game. Edstrom, Carrick, and Rempe. The three of them are going to be together. They, accounted for a goal in the last one, or at least Brodzinski and Edstrom did, and Rempe was on the ice for that one as well and had a little bit of a hand in that play. But that's your checking line, and that's a physical, no-nonsense kind of a line there. So I think this lineup looks good. For what it's worth, and we will bring this all back to Kreider and Mika and the two of them being together versus not being together, but the power play units are going to remain basically as is, meaning that Lafreniere, at least if we go by what happened in practice, he will stay on the top power play unit, even with Kreider being back. Kreider will be on the second unit. So, I definitely want Mika and Kreider apart at even strength. As far as the power play goes, I would have been open to the two of them going back together. You put Kreider on the top unit in place of Lafreniere. I know some people aren't going to like that. Lafreniere has struggled a little bit, but the reason why I think I would leave it as is with Lafreniere on the top unit is because the power play has picked it up recently. They were in a miserable slump. What were they, like 1 for 29 or whatever it was there? And they were every bit as bad as that ratio suggested. And recently they've been back to scoring on the power play, which is obviously great to see. But as far as all the reasons to keep Mika and Kreider apart, and specifically at even strength, for starters, this is kind of the big one, at least for me. This last handful of games is probably as good as Mika Zibanejad has looked all season. There might have been stretches early in the year where he was getting his points. He had at least one game where he had 3 assists, and I think there might have been at least one other 3-point game mix in there as well. But when you look at just the overall body of work and how Mika has played over the last handful of games, it's probably him at the top of his game, and he looks like he's actually having fun, enjoying playing hockey. He looks like he actually wants to be there. We're seeing him get back to being the center that plays in all 3 zones. Obviously that's very good to see as well. And I think that, him playing with Cooley and Smith has just kind of been working for him. And this is a point that I've made before on this podcast, but it's been a while, so I'll bring this up again here too, as far as one of the reasons to keep Mika and Kreider apart. You at times, and this is not exclusive to just Mika and Kreider, it's not even exclusive to just the Rangers. I think it applies to hockey players across this league and probably at other levels as well. I think you can get to a point where you almost get too comfortable with your line mates, which sounds strange on the surface, but stay with me for just a second. When you're with the same line mate or line mates for 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, I feel like at a certain point, it just starts to become old hat. You almost get too familiar and you almost get too much of an idea of exactly where guy is going to be and what's he going to look to do on this play and where's he going to position himself defensively, which again, on the surface sounds like a good thing, but it gets to a point where I feel like you might not be on your toes anymore. And like I said, everything just kind of gets old hat and it gets a little bit stale and you need to freshen things up a little bit. And I think that's kind of what we're seeing with Mika recently. It's not like he's playing world-beating hockey where he's back among the NHL elite, but he has been better over the last handful of games, and he's been doing that largely with 2 new line mates. Well, I guess Smith isn't really new, but they've had Smith move around the lineup a little bit too, but he's out there with Smith, and he's out there with Cooley. We've never really seen Mika get much run with Will Cooley, and I think so far it's been working. The other thing, and I alluded to this a minute ago when we were going through the lineup, but another reason to keep Mika and Kreider apart, Kreider on the bottom 6 gives you a little bit more depth scoring. Again, Kreider has not had a banner season. It has not been a career year for Chris Kreider. I think we're all aware of that. But like I said before, hopefully the break does him a little bit of good, and hopefully he can kind of reinvigorate the bottom 6, get this team some depth scoring. He'll be out there with Philip Hedl. That's kind of an interesting combination in its own right. So curious to see how they do. And again, we did see the fourth line link up for a goal in the most recent game, but you look at what the bottom 6 looked like in the last game. I mean, it's the 6 guys are VZ, Kaliyev, Brodzinski, Edstrom, Rempe, and Carrick. where is the offense going to come from any kind of like consistent basis? You know what I mean? Now that you've got Kreider back and even Filipino, all of a sudden you've got some depth scoring. So I like the idea of maybe spreading the wealth a little bit and not messing with the Mika line, which recently has played fairly well. The other thing here, another reason to keep these two apart, I don't want to see Will Cooley lose his spot in the top 6. Bottom line, Will Cooley is the most improved player on this Ranger team. He was very good last year, but he's even better this year. Looks like a star in the making, and he has earned his way into the top 6, and I don't want to see him be forced out of it. Like I said, he's kind of been clicking on his new line with Mika and Smith. Even earlier in the year, Will Cooley was a top 6 forward who just so happened to be playing on the third line. That's basically the long and short of it. Now, of course, there's also ways you can do this where Kreider re-enters the top 6 and Cooley also stays there. I mentioned Lafreniere. He's been scuffling a little bit recently. You could drop him out of the top 6. That's an option. But given that the Panarin line is picking it back up, I'd rather not do that. The other option, you could always drop Smith out of the top 6 and put Kreider there. And then either Cooley or Kreider goes to the right wing, probably Kreider, but they could do it whichever way they want to do it. So these are all options. They're options that you could at least consider. But this team is playing well recently. I don't want to reinvent the wheel. I don't want to throw the lines into a blender. And apparently Peter Laviolette doesn't want to either, because we do see Chris Kreider re-entering the lineup, at least at practice, a little bit earlier today on the third line. So I'm all for that. I like that move. I think that's where Kreider should be. It's funny, a lot of us are asking this question right now. Are the Rangers back? And I will say that if they win this upcoming game against the Avalanche, they're going to have Kreider back out there. They're going to have Hedl back out there. I think at that point, we can probably say yes. Hopefully the addition of those two players, if they get back into the lineup, I shouldn't say for sure. They were back in there in practice. We don't know for sure. But if those two re-enter the lineup and contribute, give the Rangers a little bit more depth, then I think for sure there's a very good chance that the Rangers could win that game against the Avalanche. And if you do that, now you've won 3 out of 4 against some very, very difficult opponents here. It would be 3 in a row, and then also the overtime loss to Dallas. So that's a heck of a stretch against, like I said, 4 challenging opponents to say the least. So going to keep everything rolling. In just a second, we're going to shift our attention to the Hartford Wolf Pack. Going to check in with them. We've been wanting to do this for a while. There's been a lot of chaos surrounding this Ranger team. Things have kind of settled a little bit, so it's a good time to check in with them, and we'll do that in just a second. All right, we just want to take a minute to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by Gametime. We all love going to live events, whether it's sports, music, theater, or comedy. One of my favorite memories was attending a concert last year in the summer. Green Day and the Smashing Pumpkins at Citi Field. The energy and excitement were unforgettable. Now, Gametime has made it even easier to get tickets for your favorite live events with their new feature, Gametime Picks. This feature filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so that you do not have to waste your time searching through thousands and thousands of tickets. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? It is Gametime. All right, so let's go ahead and keep everything rolling here. On Locked On New York Rangers, a big shout out to the everydayers as always for tuning in, sticking with this podcast, sticking with this team throughout what has been a very up and down season, to put it mildly. In our next episode, going to go ahead and talk about whatever happens between the Rangers and the Avalanche. Also going to be talking more extensively about Phil Hedl. We've been mentioning him kind of off and on throughout this entire episode, but whether he plays in that Avalanche game or not, we're going to talk a little bit about him. He had some interesting quotes after practice a little bit earlier today, so definitely looking forward to that. But for right now, Hartford Wolf Pack. Been meaning to circle back to the pack for a long time, but you guys know how it's been. All the drama behind the scenes. Fire this guy, fire that guy, trade this guy, trade that guy, waive this guy. You guys know. We don't have to summarize the whole thing. But the Hartford Wolf Pack, so far this season, currently sitting with a record of 15 wins, 15 losses, 2 overtime losses, 1 shootout loss. That puts them in 6th place out of 8 teams in the Atlantic Division. It's not great, but it is good enough to make the playoffs in the AHL, because 11 out of the 15 teams in the Eastern Conference do indeed qualify for the playoffs. Now, the Pack being where they are in the standings, they would obviously not get a bye. A couple of teams do, but the Wolf Pack in the first round would be in a best-of-3 playoff series. but they would be in the playoffs, and they've handled that best of three the last couple of seasons. They've advanced out of it. It's kind of an unforgiving situation, only a best of three, but they've done a nice job handling themselves, like I said, in certainly a challenging environment there. Bottom line, the Pack recently have scuffled a little bit. They've won only 4 out of their last 6 games. Offense has been difficult to come by in the year of 2025 here. In 5 games so far this year, 2025, Pack have only 9 goals. As far as looking at some individual players, I wanted to start with Bo Grew because I realized the other day, basically I was kind of airing my grievances about sending Brett Berard down in favor of Bo Grew. I realized, though, we didn't really give Bo Grew a fair trial. He is having a good season with the Wolf Pack. I don't think that any of this means that he's going to sub in and actually play a game with the Rangers. I could be wrong. We'll see. And all it takes is, one decision from Peter Laviolette, and he's in the lineup. An injury could also open the door as well. But the Rangers, bottom line, they sent Brett Berard down. Nobody really seemed very happy about that. But Bo Grew, 32 NHL games so far this season. He is tied with Alex Belzile for the team lead with 11 goals. He also has 18 assists, 29 points. That is second on the team, so nearly a point per game so far for Grew this year. I still don't think he ends up playing for the Rangers, but obviously we will see. I looked at this the other day, I think like 5 points in 65 career NHL games, and that's kind of been the story. It seems like he's one of those guys that can produce offensively in the AHL, but just not so much when it comes to the NHL. I want to talk about Dylan Garand. We thought maybe we'd see him make his NHL debut a little bit earlier this season. They end up going with Louis Domingue, do the Rangers, because as it turns out, Garand was dealing with an injury at that time. Decent chance I think they would have called up Garand to make his NHL debut had that not been the case. Domingue did play well, in all fairness, and did win his game. But, Garand is really stepping up his game in the AHL this season. 18 games, a save percentage of .928, a .215 goals against average, and he's somebody that already has a knack for really stepping things up big in the playoffs. We've seen him do that in each of the last 2 seasons, and since coming back from the injury, 3 games for Garand, he's only allowed 5 goals in those 3 games, 5 goals combined. So Garand having a fantastic season, and we'll see how it goes, but I think that the Rangers could maybe be looking at him as their backup goalie next season. We'll see if Quick wants to come back. If the Rangers want him back, I'm all for bringing Quick back for one more season, but Dylan Garand, I think, establishing himself as an option as well. I mentioned Alex Belzile a second ago, leading the team with 32 points. He's got 11 goals and 21 assists, so doing a great job for the Wolf Pack, but he is 33 years old, has only played 44 career NHL games, and I just don't think the Rangers are looking in that direction. It is kind of surprising that we haven't seen him play a single game with the Rangers since he's been here, starting at the beginning of last year. We've seen Jake Leschyshyn and Riley Nash and Anton Bleed. Those guys fit the profile of like fourth liners, I think, more than Alex Belzile does, so you can kind of understand it. But just haven't seen him play thus far with the Rangers. We'll see if that happens. But right now, it just doesn't look really like there's a spot for him, especially when you consider the fact that Brandon Othmann is now completely healthy for the Rangers. People are really excited about him, and with good reason. Former first-round pick, and obviously, a hard-hitting player as well. He was recently out of the lineup that took, an injury that took him out of play for some time. In total this season for Othmann, 11 games, 3 goals, 5 assists. He is a +2. He was in a fight the other night. He's actually been kind of quiet offensively since his return, since getting back from the injury. 8 games, just 1 goal and 2 assists. But I maintain that it's probably only a matter of time before we see Brandon Othmann, because there could be a situation later this year where the Rangers just feel like they need a spark, and maybe he can give it to them. And if there's a situation where the Rangers do drop out of the playoff picture, which I don't think is going to happen. I think they're going to stay in it. But if they fall out of it, then for sure you're going to call up Brandon Othmann, because at that point, there's nothing to lose, and you want to see what the kid can do. So I do think we see Brandon Othmann, at least in some capacity, with the Rangers before the season ends. Somebody else that you might be interested in is Adam Sikora, second-round pick for the Rangers in 2022. He has really improved this year from an offensive standpoint. He already has as many points this year as he did last year, or close to as many. Last year, 23 points in 66 games. This year, 35 games. He's already got 8 goals and 12 assists for a total of 20 points. He's also a -3. But again, 31 games fewer this year than he played last year, and he's only got 3 fewer points this year than last year. So he's stepping it up from a scoring perspective as well. If I'm going to project when we see Adam Sikora, probably not this year. I think you'll probably see him at some point next year, though. They might do the thing that they do where they call up a promising rookie for only a handful of games. We saw that with Offman last year, coming up for 3 games. The year before that, of course, it was Will Cooley being called up for 4 games, and Will Cooley now a valuable player on this team and somebody that rightfully is a lineup regular. So we'll see if they give Adam Sikora a similar treatment next year. They seem to like to do it that way, and I don't think that's a bad way to debut your rookie players. You call them up, let them get their feet wet, let them get a taste of NHL action, and then they're back down to the AHL. Unless they just blow your mind and just exceed all expectations, then maybe they stick around. But I think something similar certainly could happen with Adam Sikora. And we'll keep an eye on the Pack going forward. If they make the playoffs, certainly we'll update you guys on that. I mean, I'm hoping that we're talking about the Rangers in the playoffs. 2 years ago, we saw the Rangers get knocked out in the first round. The Pack made a little bit of a run, so we were talking about them quite a bit. Whatever happens, we're obviously going to be talking about the Rangers. And again, my hope is that both teams get in, but certainly we'll keep you guys posted on how the Pack is doing as a whole, and certainly the big time prospects. We'll keep an eye on those guys additionally. So, in just a second, we're going to shift our attention to just the Rangers in general. I was able to jump onto Locked On NHL the other day, recorded with Gil Martin for about 10 minutes there. Going to go ahead and play that segment from that episode coming up in just a minute. All right, we just want to take a minute to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by Indeed. You just realized your business needed to hire someone yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy, just use Indeed. When it comes to hiring, Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other sites. Indeed's sponsored jobs puts your posts at the top of the page and helps you reach the right candidates faster. Now you can speed up your hiring process with a $75 sponsored job credit. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring, Indeed is all you need. All right, so let's go and keep everything rolling here on Locked On New York Rangers. I figure we can go ahead and wrap up today's episode by playing an interview that I did with Gil Martin of Locked On NHL. If that name is familiar to you, a lot of you guys, I'm sure, watch Gil from time to time. He hosts Locked On NHL. He's also the host of Locked On New York Islanders. We've done some crossovers in the past when these teams are playing each other, and definitely looking forward rather to linking back up with Gil and before the Rangers and Islanders play each other at the end of February. I think we're going to record a crossover episode. So definitely looking forward to that. But for right now, once again, here's my spot on Locked On NHL with Mr. Gil Martin. Enjoy.
It is great to welcome back to the show the host of Locked On New York Rangers, John Chick. And John, finally, a little winning streak here. 3 of the last 4 for the Rangers. What's been different?
Well, the short answer for that is literally everything. Just about every aspect of hockey that you can think of, the Rangers have improved upon it over the last 2 weeks. I think maybe that holiday break did them some good as well. Now, granted, they did lose their first 2 games coming out of said break, but they've overall been giving you a much more honest effort recently, and it just feels like they've kind of found themselves. The last handful of games in particular, they look a lot more like the team that we saw last season. But if I could point to one thing, I mean, we could literally talk about all day about all the things that they're doing better. But I think the biggest thing now is just better overall team defensive hockey. They came out of that break there, and they started scoring some goals. So they started to find themselves offensively a little bit, but the defense was still a little bit lacking. Now, when you're watching, this win against Vegas, this win against the Devils before that, even the Blackhawks game this past weekend, the theme is just better overall team defense. The Rangers early in the season were absolutely just bleeding odd man rushes against, and they're not good at defending them either. So that's obviously not a good combination. The amount of turnovers and just overall just bad play in the defensive zone was just frankly unacceptable, and just really surprising to see that come from a team that, last year had the best record in the NHL in the regular season. So they've really tightened that up. A lot of individual defensemen have stepped up recently. I think you look at a couple of the new D-men, Vakanainen and Borgen, the two of them seem like they're settling in a little bit, especially Borgen. He was awesome against Vegas. But man, it's really pretty much everything. But I think there's nothing more important than what I just said, the defensive aspect of the game being a lot better for the Rangers.
How did this team get off to such a bad start? How do you go from President's Trophy to last place in the Metropolitan Division with mostly the same roster?
Well, everything looked okay at first, the really early parts of the season. They came out and they were pretty good. I think they were 5-0-1, but then everything fell apart just as quickly, to your point, Gil. And, Combination of things. It's strange. Like there were just nights where it felt like there was just not really any sense of urgency. I can remember a 4-game road trip early in the season. They won the first 2, then they lost to Calgary, didn't really play that well. And then against Edmonton, like they come out, and I'm expecting them to bounce back and come out with their heads on fire and just a very lethargic performance. And that's when I started thinking like, something's wrong around here. You look at, maybe the locker room was a little bit unstable because you had all the Jacob Trouba trade rumors in the offseason. Then he ultimately does get traded. I know some players weren't happy about the way that Barclay Goodrow was handled. He was, of course, placed on waivers, claimed by the Sharks. And then that memo that went out saying that the Rangers were open for business and we might trade Trouba, we might trade Kreider. So everything was kind of, I don't know what the word is, just kind of chaotic, I guess is the best thing you can say. And, in a way, a team is the sum of all of its parts. And when you look up and down the roster for, 2 months there, every single player had regressed from last season. Like every single player, other than Will Cooley, on this roster was better last season than they were this season. And in some cases, maybe that still is what's going on here, but things are starting to turn. A lot of individual guys are playing better. Lindgren's played a lot better recently. He was under fire from Ranger fans. Mika Zibanejad, nobody's caught more flack, and I include myself in this, from Ranger fans than he has. But he's been a lot better recently too, playing in all 3 zones like he's known to do, and has a nice little 6-game point streak going on as well. So team is the sum of all of its parts, and the parts weren't very good for that chunk that they were going through there. Everybody's struggling at the same time.
Who do you blame? Is this on the GM, the coach, the players? Obviously, there's a combination, but like, where do you primarily place the blame? It just seems like the ingredients were similar, but the soup didn't taste good.
Right. Yeah, no, that's a good analogy, and I think that's pretty spot on. I think that works here. If I was going to rank those things, I would say it's on the players first, because at a certain point, Drury, I think sometimes does kind of lose track of the human aspect of this thing. And maybe the situation with Trouba in the offseason could have been held better. Maybe the same thing can be said for, Barclay Goodrow, essentially forcing him out of town. But at the same time, these guys are pro athletes, and players get traded, players get waived. I mean, this is not exclusive to the 2024-2025 Rangers. This has been happening for years and years, not just with the Rangers, but with every team and across all sports as well. So at a certain point, you could be mad about it for maybe a day or two, but man, eventually you got to suck it up and get back out there and do your job. And I think it's, for that reason, it's mostly on the players. After that, I would say maybe Drury is next most to blame. The last calendar year or so has not been great for Drury. I think he's had a good amount of really smart, really savvy moves that he's made as GM of the Rangers, but kind of a tepid trade deadline this past year when they're in position to maybe win it all. They didn't really do a whole lot there. And then all the aforementioned drama of this past offseason as well with Trouba and with Goodrow. So I think he would be second. And Laviolette, I mean, he's hanging in there, and it seems like he's finally got these guys, battling out of this. I wouldn't say he's blameless. No coach ever is when their team loses as much as the Rangers were, but I'd put him at the bottom of the list as far as most to blame. I think he's the least of all 3 of those parties.
So the Eastern Conference, the bottom half is wide open. The last 2 wild card spots, maybe even possibly third place in the Metro, kind of out there for the taking. Can the Rangers climb back into a playoff spot, and what do they need to do, let's say at the trade deadline, in order to get there?
Yeah, I think for sure. To your point, Gil, I mean, I know that the kind of the middle portion of the Eastern Conference right now, it's really bunched up. There's just a boatload of teams within a couple of points of each other. But the Rangers are right there. And honestly, all it takes is one, solid stretch of winning hockey, and you'll kind of leapfrog some of these teams. It can look daunting with so many teams there, but you're one hot streak away from starting to climb right back up and maybe even get past a wild card spot, maybe even get back into the top 3 in the division. I think it's at least possible. As far as the trade deadline, I mean, the Rangers themselves are going to be the ones I think that do the most to determine what the approach is going to be there. Because if they can get themselves between now and then back into a playoff position, even if it is the second wild card spot, I think the Rangers will push forward. I think you will see them with some cap space now available to them. I think you'll see them add to the team at the trade deadline. But, if they falter again and if things start to go south, then the opposite could happen. You could see them sell off Riley Smith or a Ryan Lindgren or, Will Borgen. I mean, I know he just got here, but he's a UFA at the end of the season too. And I think I'm getting to the point where I'd like to see Borgen extended. He's really done a nice job. But, Yeah, man, it's all in the hands of the players. If they play well and they give this front office reason to believe, then I think they'll add. If not, though, if they're on the outside looking in, then I think you'll at least see them sell some of these guys that are UFAs at the end of the year and maybe open up some spots for some of the prospects that the Rangers have. Brett Berard could be back up. Brian Hoffman, I think we'll see him at some point this season too. So, yeah, man, it's all up to the players and how they perform between now and then.
So if they do add, what are they looking for?
Yeah, I mean, I would have said if you talked to me as recently as like a week and a half ago, I would have looked at defensemen for sure. But that group's kind of settling in pretty nicely right now to the point where Zach Jones can't even get a game. I mean, he's been a healthy scratch for like at least 10 games in a row at this point, I think. And that's a whole nother story in and of itself. You'd like to see him crack the lineup every once in a while. But, you can always see somebody get added as far as like a forward is concerned, maybe like a top 9 kind of guy. They just claimed Arthur Kaliev off of waivers, but I don't think that's like the big move that they would do. I think a forward with, a certain amount of grit, good forechecking kind of forward would be nice. We'll see. It's a ways off, but I think you could see them adding, one defenseman and one forward if I had to take a guess at it, and if they are in position to buy, like we were talking about. All right, so a big thanks to Mr. Gil Martin for inviting me on to Locked On NHL to talk a little bit about the Rangers and how they've been faring recently. Hope you guys enjoyed that, and definitely check out Locked On NHL. There's basically a revolving door of hosts. Different Locked On hosts will host Locked On NHL on this day or that day, whatever it might be. So the show stays fresh for that reason, and a lot of them you'll know from either watching their podcasts or doing crossovers here with Locked On New York Rangers. They all do a fantastic job, so definitely check out Locked On NHL if you get the opportunity to do so. But we can call it there for today. If you guys would like to get in touch with this podcast, please send an email to lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Once again, that is lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. And definitely give us a follow on Twitter @jchick17. Once again, that is @JCHIK17. Thank you guys as always, and I will see you next